Welcome to Dark Bedtime Tales. Tonight's story explores an unsettling phenomenon that has haunted the imaginations of people worldwide, the black-eyed children. These eerie figures, cloaked in mystery and fear, have sparked countless tales of terror, leaving those who encounter them with more questions than answers. Where do they come from? What do they want? And most chilling of all, what happens if you let them in?
Dark Bedtime Tales.
The night was thick and still. The kind of silence that hung in the air like a dark curtain. Sarah Thompson lay awake in her small Vermont farmhouse, nestled far from the hustle of civilization. The wind whistled through the cracks in the window frame, the only thing keeping her company at such a late hour. But there was something about this night that felt different. It wasn't just the quiet or the chill seeping through the wooden walls. It was the weight in the air, a strange heaviness pressing down on her chest, making her feel uneasy in her own skin. She had lived in the old house for over a decade with her husband, Jack. Though winters in Vermont could be harsh, she had never felt a night like this before. There was an unnatural stillness outside, the kind that made it feel like even the animals were hiding. Suddenly it came, a soft knock at the door. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She sat up in bed, eyes wide, straining to listen for a second knock. Jack, fast asleep beside her, didn't stir. The clock on her nightstand glowed 2:15 a.m. The knock came again. Louder this time, persistent. It wasn't the kind of knock you'd expect from someone in trouble or from someone looking for help. It was slow, deliberate, as if the person outside knew exactly how much time they had to wait for her. Sarah pulled her robe tighter around her, a chill creeping up her spine as she padded across the wooden floor toward the front door. The wind had picked up outside, howling faintly, but beneath it, the knocking persisted. She hesitated at the door, her hand hovering over the knob. Something wasn't right. "Who's there?" she called softly, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound firm. No answer. She took a deep breath, telling herself it was probably just someone lost in the snowstorm, maybe a neighbor whose car had broken down. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Still, she pulled the door open a crack, just enough to peer outside. Two figures stood on the porch, their small frames barely illuminated by the dim light above the door. Children, Sarah thought at first. They were no older than 10 or 11, a boy and a girl. They wore simple clothes, outdated somehow, woolen coats and scuffed shoes. But it was their eyes that stopped Sarah cold. They were entirely black, soulless orbs that reflected no light. "Please, ma'am," the boy said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "We need to come in. We're lost, and our parents will be here soon." The girl, standing beside him, nodded, her lips parted in a slight smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Sarah's hand tightened on the door. An irrational wave of terror gripped her. Every instinct screamed at her to shut the door, to lock it, and never look back. But the children stood still, waiting, their black eyes fixed on her as if they knew she couldn't close the door. "I can't let you in," she whispered, her voice shaky. The boy's smile widened, but it was wrong, too wide, too unnatural. "You have to. We're cold. We need to come in." Suddenly, Jack's voice came from behind her, groggy and confused. "Who's at the door?" Startled, Sarah glanced back, and in that split second, she swore the children moved closer, though they hadn't taken a step. She slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. "There's no one," she lied, backing away from the door, her heart pounding in her chest. But she could feel their presence outside, lingering, waiting. Jack rubbed his eyes, oblivious to the tension that crackled in the air. "Come back to bed. It's late." Sarah nodded, but sleep was far from her mind. She lay awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, every creak and groan of the house making her jump. Hours passed, and slowly the oppressive feeling in the air faded, as if whatever had been waiting outside had finally given up. But the next morning, when Sarah went outside, she saw 2 small sets of footprints in the snow leading up to the door, and none leading away. Weeks passed, and Sarah tried to push the incident from her mind. Life resumed its quiet rhythm, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, lurking just beyond the edge of her consciousness. The farmhouse, once cozy and familiar, now felt alien to her. She found herself glancing over her shoulder while cooking dinner, feeling eyes on her while she did the laundry. Then, one evening, Jack fell ill. It started with a sudden nosebleed, followed by bouts of dizziness that left him bedridden for days. The doctors couldn't explain it. No infection, no underlying illness. But Jack's condition worsened. His skin turned a sickly shade of pale, his energy drained from him as if something was feeding on him. Sarah began having nosebleeds too. And then came the dreams. In them, she saw the children again. Always at the door, their black eyes boring into her, unblinking, as they whispered to her in their flat, monotone voices. They never spoke words she understood, but their presence was enough to fill her with dread. The final straw came when one of their cats, a lively tabby named Willow, was found dead on the porch. There were no signs of a struggle, no marks on its body, just lifeless, as if the very essence had been drained from it. It wasn't long after that Sarah knew the children would return. They were coming back. The knocking began around 2 a.m., just as it had the first time. This time, it was louder, more insistent. Jack, too weak to get out of bed, groaned as Sarah slipped from beneath the covers and crept toward the door. She didn't ask who was there. She knew. The boy's voice was muffled through the door, but it was unmistakable. "Let us in. Sarah. We need to come in." Her blood turned to ice. "How did they know her name?" "We won't hurt you," the girl added, her voice just as hollow as before. "We only need to come inside." The door rattled, as if the children were pushing against it. Sarah backed away, her mind racing. She had heard the stories, read the accounts of others who had encountered these black-eyed children. People who let them in never fared well. Some became ill, some vanished without a trace, and others were left with nothing but a lingering sense of doom. She clutched the door handle as if her life depended on it. "Go away," she shouted, her voice breaking. But the knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, more desperate. The children were relentless. "Sarah!" The boy's voice was a whisper now, seeping through the cracks in the door. "You can't keep us out." And then, just as suddenly as it began, the knocking ceased. The house fell into an oppressive silence. Only the soft sound of Jack's labored breathing in the next room broke the stillness. Sarah waited, her body tense, expecting the door to burst open at any moment, but it didn't. When she finally dared to look out the window, there was nothing but the cold, empty night staring back at her. The children were gone. In the days that followed, the house seemed to change. Shadows flickered where there shouldn't have been any. Strange whispers echoed through the halls. Voices too low to make out, but present all the same. Jack's health continued to decline, and no matter how many doctors they consulted, no one could find an explanation. Sarah couldn't help but feel that something dark had taken root in their home. And always, in the back of her mind, Sarah felt them watching. The children were still there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for her to open the door. She knew it was only a matter of time before they came knocking again. So, the question remains, what would you do if you heard that knock at your door? Would you let them in? Thank you for listening to Dark Bedtime Tales. If you enjoyed tonight's story, make sure to subscribe and lock your doors, just in case the black-eyed children come knocking.